guys, how are you doing? For today's episode of Whisky for Dummies, we have the Dram Club's co-founder and also the founder for Blind Guild, Swati Sharma, to give us her recommendations of top 5 whiskies for beginners. So Swati, please let us know how should a beginner start their whiskey journey.
Thanks for the introduction, Vinayak. Okay, I think last time you had mentioned in one of your episodes that how someone should go for an easygoing whiskey, which is not too overpowering or too flavorful. So I think my 5 recommendations would start with the Glenlivet 15. Firstly, it's very widely available. It's very reasonably priced, so it doesn't burn a hole in your pocket. And from a whiskey perspective, it is a very delicate, very palatable, very well-balanced whiskey to have. So that's number 1. The second whiskey is Indri, the latest Indian whiskey on the block. I like trying Indian whiskies. I like recommending Indian whiskies. And it has become quite a favorite for me. Lot of flavors, but again, very well-rounded, very balanced. So there's no sharpness or harshness that one gets to taste. The third whiskey is one of my all-time favorites. It's slightly overpriced, Lagavulin 16, but it's a whiskey that I would recommend everybody. We always say that peat and sherry are very heavy flavors and they tend to overpower the whiskey, but this one is just perfect harmony of both the flavors, worth every money that you'd spend on the whiskey. The fourth whiskey that I would recommend is Glenmorangie Lasanta, 12-year-old. Glenmorangie is one of my favorite distilleries. They have tall stills, so the liquid is really light, and even though Lasanta is a sherry cask whiskey, the flavor really carries through well and it's very easy on your palate. And my fifth recommendation is the Aultmore 12-year-old, a Speyside classic, very floral, very grassy, and a very delicate whiskey. So it's very easy for people to have it and you will just keep sipping on it, it's that easy. So those are my 5 recommendations. Now how about we discuss your 5 recommendations for beginners? And because I know you like heavily peated whiskies and heavily sherried whiskies, stay away from the Aultmores and maybe the Glenfarclas and the Glenlivet.
So anyways, because this is a recommendation for beginners, I would have stayed away from heavily sherried and heavily peated whiskies. Also, in the last episode, we spoke about how if you're a beginner or starting your whiskey journey, how you should look at whiskies that are not very overpowering in any particular flavor camp, be it like, a sherry or a peated or a smoky whiskey, right? My top 5 whiskey recommendations for beginners would be Glenlivet 12. It's a distillery that I personally like a lot, and especially after spending a day with Dennis Malcolm, it's impossible not to like the distillery and what they do at the distillery. So Glenlivet 12, very delicate, very floral, very fruity. Love that whiskey. You can have it any time of the day. The second one for me would be Singleton 15-year-old.
That's interesting.
It's a marriage of ex-bourbon and ex-PX sherry casks, and it's again very delicate, very easy on the palate, and you get that nice light raisins, date notes that you get typically in a PX, but not in a very overpowering way. So very, very well balanced and very easy to drink whiskey. My third recommendation would be Ardbeg 10. I know you asked me to stay away from something heavily peated, but I personally don't find Ardbeg 10 heavily peated, especially going by what the distilleries from Isla are coming up with these days, right? You look at Supernova, Hypernova, Octomores. They're all amping up the ppms on all the whiskies, right? So third would be Ardbeg 10. My fourth whiskey recommendation will be the Glenlivet 15-year-old Revival. It's a marriage of PX and Oloroso casks, and I don't find it again a sherry bomb. It has everything that you associate in a whiskey that has been mature in sherry cask, but slightly toned down flavors. It has a complexity, it has a richness, and it's very satisfying. You get those dark fruits and nutty notes as well as the baking spices that you associate typically with sherry. So I think anyone who's curious about sherry whiskies and doesn't want to get put off by them, I think Glenlivet 15-year-old is a perfect whiskey to try. And my last whiskey would be an Indian whiskey, not because you like Indian whiskies. It's a Paul John Classic. At 55 or 55.5, give or take, 0.5% here or there. At 55% ABV, It's probably one of the highest ABV whiskeys available in India. And what I like about it is, in spite of the high ABV, it's a very approachable whiskey. Like, I mean, I remember the first time I had, and that's still very vivid, those notes for me. It was like crisp green apples and pears that you were getting, and a lot of honey as well. And obviously, like, you get a bit of malt as well. But it's a beautiful whiskey, available, if you're in India, available only in Goa. But yep, I think that's my top 5 whiskey recommendations. So you mentioned that you like trying and recommending Indian whiskeys. Now, in your top 5, there was only one Indian whiskey, right? Obviously, because it's for beginners and you need to add whiskeys from different parts of the world. Tell us 5 Indian whiskeys that you would recommend.
In no particular order. Indri, of course, which I've already spoken about. Then Paul John Bold, which is a peated single malt from Paul John Distilleries. Christmas Edition 2018, again by Paul John. Not available anymore, but again, one of the most beautiful whiskeys that I've had tried. Diwan Gyanchans. This comes from Jammu and possibly one of the very few single malts that comes from that area. Very recently launched, again a whiskey to look out for. And we have PX from Paul John. Sherry cask whiskey, and possibly the best sherry cask whiskey India has seen. Okay Vinayak, now that you have grilled me on my selection of Indian whiskies, how about you also tell us your 5 favorite Indian whiskies?
My 5 recommendations for Indian single malts, and pardon me for recency bias. One has to be Amrut Portonova, 62.1 or 62.7% ABV. What a fabulous whiskey it is. Second one would be Rampur Jugalbandi, I think is the number 2. It's been finished in Calvados casks. Again, fabulous whiskey, loved it. So my third pick would be Christmas Edition by Paul John 2018 Expression, something that even Swati likes. I love the complexity and the flavors that the whiskey brings for the price. Fourth pick would be again something from Paul John, Kanya, a gorgeous dram, again a limited release. Sold out everywhere, but again, if you have it, it's a beautiful dram. The fifth whiskey for me would be Indri. I think I have to give it off to these guys for coming up with an experimental whiskey. The whiskey is a marriage of 3 different casks as their first whiskey. So Indri again is a flavorful yet delicate and a very sumptuous whiskey. So yeah, those are my 5 picks. Hopefully soon we can do a video about top 10 Indian single malts. Make sure to follow us for more such recommendations. Cheers.